gotta go home. There's people waiting on me, waiting to ask me, and waiting to know just where I've been. Where did I go? Did the house burn down? Is there blood in my hands that I'll make a deal with the devil just to get out of here? Mean heart, somebody told me, well I don't know. Maybe it got a little cleaning to do. Everybody knows which way I've been walking. I can't sleep, but I'm so tired of talking to you. Mean heart, somebody told me, well I don't know. Maybe it got a little cleaning to do. Everybody knows which way I've been walking. I can't sleep, but I'm so tired of talking to you. Color my love, darkest shade of brown, almost looks black to you, looks black to me. Color my mood, deepest midnight blue. Color me upside down, color me inside out. Say you're gonna leave me, say you just can't stay. Didn't want my baby, he didn't like the color of my love. Under the crimson moon, my hands are tied, wrapped within the barbed wire of your heart. My mind is the color of night, darkest ebony sky. There are no sparkling stars for miles. Say you're gonna leave me, say you just can't stay. Didn't want my baby, he didn't like the color of my love. Color my love, darkest shade of brown, almost looks black to you, it looks black to me. You say you're gonna leave me, say you just can't stay.
And again.
Moaning, I'm just moaning. There's nothing here to keep me. I'm leaving, and I'm turning away the blues. When I go, you won't be waving. I hope you're sitting down, leaning against the table. I don't have to go far to find some people who've never known me. I've cursed and I've cried. I couldn't get drunk if I tried. I've been trying. Every time I go, somehow it turns to winter. Like I could take a yard, but I couldn't stand a meter. In the morning light, I find the morning is all that matters. I've cursed and I've cried. I couldn't get drunk if I tried. I've been trying.
Evening, everybody. Welcome back. Welcome to our Canadian wine tasting, and that's a little bit misleading because we also have a cider here. We are going to be tasting three things tonight, and at 5:30, Brent Rowland of Averill Creek Wines, the head winemaker, is going to be joining us for that, so that's going to be really fun. When we talk about Canadian wines, we're talking about three regions in particular. We're talking about Ontario, specifically the Niagara Peninsula. We're talking about the Okanagan Valley in BC, and we're now talking about Vancouver Island as well. Now, there are some grapes grown in Nova Scotia. There's actually, I believe, wine made in basically every province of Canada at this point. But in terms of major production, things you're actually going to see on store shelves for the most part, it really is the three wines, although we have something from Nova Scotia at the minute. This was a tough one to put together. I think Devin and I worked harder on this particular event than we have on any of the others. Just because finding things that are really high quality, that have interesting stories, and that we can fit on an $80 budget was harder with Canada than it was for other things. We'll talk a little bit when we get to the Alize here about why it is that Canadian wine is a little bit expensive. Let's jump right into it with the Creek and Gulley cider. So this is a natural Pet-Nat cider from the Naramata bench. We're going to talk about Naramata here quite a bit when we get to the white wine, but let's start with Pet-Nats, ciders, and natural producers just in general. Now, if you've been to the Okanagan, I think you'll know that as much as you do see a lot of vines, you actually see a great deal more in terms of orchards. And with names like Peachland, there is just tons and tons and tons of different orchards and everything else in the region. Apples and apple ciders are a really old form of alcohol, going back to like the Norman ciders from Normandy, France. We still carry some of the really, really high-end and interesting French ciders on our shelves. And to see Canada doing stuff like this is really interesting because there's no reason Canada can't. We have incredible cider makers in Ontario, in BC. We're starting to get some really interesting stuff coming out of Quebec. And it's something that Canada has the capacity to do really, really well. There's some madness going on with the laptop over here. There we go. So let's taste this to start, and let's see where we're going with this one. See, I really, really like this. Really cloudy, really fun. Like the apple flavor is so bright and so immediate. And the carbonation is so gentle. This is a natural carbonation on this. This is not forced carbed like you would find with a Strongbow or a Magners or, God help you, a Summersby. It also doesn't taste like fake plastic green Jolly Ranchers like a Summersby either. Hello, Hand. Nice to see you as always. There we are. Yeah, so let's talk about what makes a cider unique, and we'll talk about Pet-Nat in particular here. So when you're making something sparkling, there's a variety of different ways you can do it. You can force carb it just by straight up pushing CO2 into the liquid till the stuff carbonates. That is one method. It's not a particularly good method, but it's certainly one that you could use. The one that we see very often is called the Charmat or tank method, where after a primary fermentation to get rid of the alcohol, or to get rid of the sugar and create alcohol, they pour the wine or cider into a tank, and they add a little bit more sugar to it, and they allow it to re-ferment in the tank, and then they bottle the now fermented and carbonated beverage into bottles. The third way that we'll talk about is the champagne method, or the méthode traditionnelle. This is where you ferment the wine completely dry, you age it for a time, and then you add a little bit of sugar back into the bottle and allow it to recarbonate with that sugar in the bottle. So that's how you end up with champagnes. Now there's also the oldest method, the méthode ancestrale. So this is kind of the oldest way of making sparkling anything in the world, and that is to arrest the fermentation, usually by chilling it down to a very, very low temperature while there's still some sugar left in the wine or in the cider. And then you bottle it and just let the original fermentation complete in the bottle. So in a way of speaking, there's no secondary fermentation. It's all the same primary fermentation. It just happens partly in the fermenting tank and partly in the bottle. And these are a style that are known as Pet-Nats or Pétillant Naturel. This is something that when I was doing my wine formal education, you needed to know that méthode ancestrale was like a legitimate style, but it was one of those, oh, you'll probably never see it things. Well, the interesting thing about the natural wine movement is a lot of these really old-fashioned, oh, you'll probably never actually see one in the wild types of winemaking and traditions and grape styles, they're all making a comeback, which is really, really wonderful. So Pet-Nats right now, and just like kind of the running joke around here is, everything I bring in is always a Riesling. Everything Devin brings in is a damn Pet-Nat. Every time. We have 5 new Pet-Nats every time I bloody turn around. What do people rave about Summersby? It's inexpensive. It's very easy to understand. It's, fresh and clean and pretty, and it just tastes really chemically to me. I don't consider Summersby a cider. I think it's more of a cider flavored cooler. There, I said it. See what else we got here. Should you stir it up so the sediment is suspended? You certainly can. When it comes to the chunky bits, I like them, and they're not going to hurt you. What that is remember I said that the fermentation is still happening in the bottle? Well, that's the yeast. That's the leftover yeast that actually fermented this cider to actually be sparkling. So that's all that is just the leftover dead yeast. They taste kind of nutty. Some people find them taste a little bit soapy. They're not going to hurt you, but some people find them kind of icky and gross. I don't mind them at all, but, maybe it's not for everybody. Next up. Yeah, so amazing ciders from Prince Edward County, Ontario. I have not had the chance to go, and as you can tell, I still haven't got a new earbud that I actually don't hate. Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about the Okanagan Valley itself. This comes off the Naramata Bench, and the Naramata Bench is, to my palate, my absolute favorite region in BC. You've got the Golden Mile south of Oliver. You've got the absolute heat trap that's down by Soyuz, and that's where Incomeep and a lot of the wines like that come from. We're even seeing some wines coming from closer up towards Creston, BC. The wines by... Oh, wow. Name of the winery's completely left my head. Devin, you can catch me up on that one in the comments. I can't remember the name of the winery that we had for a while that came from the Creston area. But Naramata Bench is literally just one hillside right against Lake Okanagan, and the lake, again, just like with the Rheingau, which we talked about when we did our German tasting, the light hits the lake and it comes up. You get these beautiful early morning fogs. It's very, very cold at night because it's a high altitude region, but it gets this beautiful, beautiful afternoon and evening light that really brings out the ripeness in the grapes. And it's one of those regions where it gets cold enough at night that you get this bright, piercing acidity, and yet during the day, it heats up enough that you get beautiful ripeness. And compared to some of the wines, especially from the southern part of the Okanagan down by Soyuz, I find they're very much like Washington State wines, where it gets so bakingly hot during the day. You get these high alcohol, very jammy, very juicy, very concentrated wines. But it's not really great white wine country. It gets so hot that it actually cooks off the acid. And you end up with wines that perhaps, well, you can end up with big, fun, extracted reds. It's not really white wine country, and it's not, to me, interesting red wine country either. And yeah, I think a Scrumpy is actually quite apt. I think the alcohol is a little high for a Scrumpy. I think this is up at 7%. Yes, it is. But yeah, this is just very, very fun. Creek and Gulley make quite a few ciders. I think this is their most interesting one to me, and it's the first one that we've carried. We're selling absolutely buckets of cider. I think this is going to be the summer of ciders and White Claws. So we are going to be bringing in more interesting ciders than just what we have right now. And I actually think we have great cider right now. So, you know, more and more and more things coming in as the weather warms up. How are we for time? We're exactly where I wanted to be. So if you notice me looking at my watch, it is because the winemaker, Brent Rowland from Averill Creek, will be joining us right at 6:30. So I'm trying to not hurry along, but to get through the first two wines before he gets here, so that he's not bored and trapped talking about someone else's Roussanne that he may never have had. I am trying to get us to this point for 6:30. Bailey Groman Estate, thank you very much, Devin. That is exactly the winery I was trying to think of and couldn't. I quite liked that. That was very, very fun, very fresh, and I love that it's still going. I'm still getting something out of it. And I think when I come back to this at the end, it's actually going to have changed a little bit just by opening up. But let's move on to the white. This is from Lake Breeze Estates. This is an estate that I visited for the first time in 2002, which was the first time I went to the Okanagan when I was 20. That is... I just got a snicker from the hand at when I was 20, which was very nice of him. Lovely, lovely person. So this is their brand new cellar series. So their standard wines have really, really bright kind of pop art labels. These more refined labels are their new estate series or cellar series. These are kind of the more serious wines that are designed for a little more close appreciation. I don't love the term, but it's right off their website. Now, this is Roussanne, and if you've never heard of Roussanne, I don't blame you. Roussanne is one of the most interesting and one of the most unusual grapes out there. When it's done really, really well, it has this beautiful kind of herbal tea characteristic on the nose. And when it's done badly, it tastes like absolutely nothing. Roussanne is part of the traditional Rhone blend. So if you buy a Côte de Rhone red, you know, it's going to be Grenache, and it's going to have Shiraz, and it's going to have Monastrell, or pardon me, Mourvèdre is the French term for that grape, and probably some Carignan in it. But if you get a Côte de Rhone white, they're allowed to put in Grenache Blanc and Marsanne and Viognier. But to me, the most interesting grape in that blend is actually the Roussanne. Now, Roussanne has a lot of problems in terms of growing it. It is very, very susceptible to high winds historically. So if you get a really, really windy year, the bunches of grapes will simply drop off the vine. It's very susceptible to downy mildew. So if it gets too wet and too cold at night, the grapes will literally rot on the vine. It also is very, very fussy about the soils it grows in. If it gets a little too much water, this is a vine that's happy to just produce and produce and produce, just tons and tons and tons of grapes, but it'll be very, very watery wine, and the wine won't be of any particularly high quality at all. So Roussanne is not a lot of fun to grow. And one of the wine books, the very first wine books that I ever read, had this to say about Roussanne: Roussanne is gorgeous, Roussanne is wonderful, Roussanne is doomed. And because I read that very early on in my wine career, it stuck with me to this day. So whenever I see a Roussanne, I always grab it because they're not that common. Now, better clones are out there, as we have kind of refined growing grapes and refined grape varieties to find better examples of them. The new clones of Roussanne have patched up a lot of those issues, but it's still very uncommon. But plantings are on the rise. Nobody's ripping it out of the ground anymore. Okay. Oh, man, back already? Good Lord. Well, joke's on you. I have to open it. So, let's talk about how this tastes. I think that little bit of an herbal tea thing is on the nose. I get kind of dried lemon. I get a little bit of pineapple. But really, this is very herbal and very different. It's the only Canadian Roussanne I've ever seen, so it's not really like I can say, oh, well, this is very typical of a Canadian Roussanne. I have absolutely no idea, and I think that's so fun. It is similar to, but quite different from a lot of the French Roussannes I've had. I think this is a little more residual sweetness than a lot of the other examples I've had, but really, straight Roussannes, I've maybe had 6 or 8 in my life, and I do seek them out. So I really love how incredibly interesting the nose is. There's just so much going on. It's so pretty. I get beeswax. I get honey. Every time I come back to it, I'm now getting apples. Every time I come back, it changes a little. Also, 20% cider only sold in barrels, Stephen? You'd go blind. Good Lord. I don't want to drink that. So in terms of other regions in the Okanagan, because we've talked quite a bit about the Naramata Bench, when we go down south into Osoyoos, the soils change quite a bit. It's very, very rocky. It reminds me far more than anywhere else in BC of being a desert. It is blanched, rocky soils. There's almost no actual topsoil in the vineyard. It's just a few vines sticking out of hard rock. The Golden Mile south of Oliver is exactly what you'd picture. It's part of why it's the most popular tourist region for winemaking down there. It's got, the highway running right down the middle of the valley, wineries on both sides. It's very green and very pretty. All the wineries are up on, the 2 hillsides on either side of the valley. There's lots of really great patio restaurants. But that area has been a winemaking area for long enough now that a lot of the smaller wineries in that part of the world are gone. It's, you'll drive past, whole rows of vineyard, and it's, oh, I wonder if there's a winery here. No, this is owned by Sumac Ridge. It's just all of this side of the valley is just Sumac Ridge. There isn't a winery here. The Sumac Ridge winery is, I think it's just outside Kelowna, actually. But, you're miles and miles and miles from the winery. It's just acres of vineyard, which it's an agriculture region. That makes sense. But I like, when I go wine touring, I like to visit a lot of little wineries. I don't want to go to a big corporate tasting room because they're A, overpriced, and B, very boring. So I always appreciate when I get a chance to try more things and smaller things. The Naramata Bench, for the most part, remains that way. There are some bigger wineries that have holdings on Naramata Bench because it is becoming quite a famous sub-region of the Okanagan. Red Rooster, for example, started there. The old Red Rooster winery is now Therapy Vineyards. And the actual Red Rooster holdings in the area, Red Rooster is no longer there. They're down in the touristy regions, but they still have vineyard holdings there. But for the most part, it's all very, very small operations, very small winemakers, and I really like that. What would pair well with the Roussanne? Ooh, that's a really, really good question. I'm kind of feeling like a really simple pasta with just oil and herbs would be absolutely perfect. I also kind of like this idea with shrimp maybe, or even with lobster. If I seem a little distracted, it's because my earbud just started going nuts. There we go. Yeah, I could see this with shrimp. I could see this with lobster. I could see this with anything butternut squash. Actually, this would be beautiful together. And then I think, yeah, anything with just a simple kind of pasta with herbs would be very, very pretty as well. Sunchokes, actually, and this would be really, really nice. Are they a blended variety? I mean, any varietal can be blended for the most part. I had a Muscat Chardonnay, for example, yesterday, and it was actually pretty okay. We'll be bringing that one in. It was very nice and very affordable. Anything can be blended. Some regions in the Rhone Valley, like Saint Paye, I believe Hermitage Blanc, which is a rare bird, you don't see them very often. I believe they have to be either Marsan Roussanne or just Roussanne. I've seen one Saint Paye that was 100% Roussanne, and then there's a couple of the North Rhone appellations, Condrieu and Chateaubriand. They have to be 100% Viognier. So there absolutely are some regions in the Northern Rhone that will do a straight Roussanne. Most of the Roussannes that I've seen done as a straight variety, though, have either been from southern France, down in Vendée-Pays-d'Oc on the coast, or they have been done in the New World. Writer's Block, Writer's Block, by the Steel Wines, they had a Roussanne. Didn't sell very well, but it was a darn nice Roussanne. And we also had one from Australia for a long time, which we can't get anymore because the winery is out of business. So no, it's not purely a blending variety. Do I find the Similkameen Valley to be similar to the Golden Mile? Jeremy, I haven't actually been to the Similkameen. I've heard it's getting very commercial, but I've not actually been. I've had some of the wines from there, and I'm told that it's very fun to go, and I do plan on trying to get out there maybe as soon as next summer, because I don't think there's really going to be wine touring this year. But no, I do need to get back out there, because the last time I visited a winery in the Okanagan was probably 2008. So it has been a very long time. Yeah, I think that was, yeah, it would have been driving back from Vancouver when I almost moved to Vancouver. So, yeah, that would have been it. Always go to the Ruby Blues. That's a very, very fun winery. Volume just went bad. How are we doing there on volume, Aaron? It's still on my shirt. Oh, have I bollocksed it all up? Okay.
Come here.
Yeah.
Come here. Oh, jeez.
I know, it's all my fault. I've ruined everything. Thank you.
Better.
Better? Everybody? We got better sound? So, how are we on our guest speaker, Aaron?
We're good.
We are good to go? I'll throw in the earbud and we will move on to the red if he is here. Brent, can you hear me? Yeah. I can hear you. Can the guests hear Brent? They can. Wonderful. They can awesome. Now. Awesome. Welcome. Thank you very much for coming. I really appreciate you doing this.
No, it's a pleasure. So definitely a pleasure.
We've talked at length about the Naramata bench, because apparently we have your wine and then two things to the Naramata bench. So my, great encompassing of all the Canadian regions is perhaps a bit too specific. But yeah, why don't you tell us about your winery and about your wine region? Because I think for a lot of folks, the idea of wine coming from Vancouver Island is a bit new for them.
Yeah, I can see why, and even me a little bit was surprised when so first I do have to say that I am a Lethbridge boy.
Really? I
was Mr. LCI Ram in 1995, and I swam for the Pronghorns in 96, 97, and 98, so this is a great conversation for me.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah, but anyway, so yeah, my kind of wine journey was very specific. After I retired from swimming, I went and just surfed the globe for my 20s, doing the sommelier thing, like working at night, and then I could surf all day.
Mm-hmm.
Then decided to kind of move more into production. So quit my job, sold my house, and moved to Australia. did the wine program at University of Adelaide, and then did 19 international harvests all over the world, just trying to get as much experience as I could. And the whole goal was to really come back to the West Coast. But I hadn't been here for a long time, and when I left, the wines had much to be desired. And I came back in 2018 to work for Averill Creek, and I've worked for some pretty amazing producers. I'm very fortunate that they took me under their wing. But I thought, okay, I'm moving back to the island. I can surf, sail, snowboard, and golf all in the same day, but the quality of the wines aren't going to be it's not going to be the pedigree that I was used to working with. But the first vintage, I was blown away. This place is just ready to explode with potential. So I'm very excited to be in the Cowichan Valley. We have very warm summers and very cool shoulders, which makes for perfect winemaking. We retain acidity, retain tension and freshness and vibrancy without having to ameliorate the wines at all. And I'm a very hands-off winemaker, so I don't add yeast, I don't add enzymes, I don't add nutrients, I don't filter, I don't fine, and most of the time they're either sulfur-free or just a dusting before bottling. And making wines in this region is very conducive for that, because the pH is so low that the wines are very microbially stable, so I don't need to ameliorate too much. So it's a very exciting time, and I feel like it's just ready to explode.
Well, I know that Joue Red's been doing absolutely spectacularly for us. It was the one wine that I absolutely had to have on the table tonight for this. It's exactly what I wanted to pour. Now, Joue, of course, means play, and it's a very playful wine. Is this you kind of getting a chance to experiment with field blends? What is this wine to you? Where did this wine come from for you?
The whole Joue line for us is very much that. It'll change every year. We're such a new region. Canada is an infant in the global context of wine. So the first thing that emerging wine regions do is emulate. So here's our Bordeaux blend, here's our Burgundian Chardonnay, here's our Alsatian Riesling, which is great. Those wines are amazing. I love them. But I'm trying to be a little bit more ostentatious and figure out what wines from this region taste like. And by doing as little as I can, I'm allowing the vintage, the variety, and the region to speak loudly in the glass, and not anything that the winemaker tricks, So that's the whole spirit of the Joue, is to really kind of push the boundaries. It'll change every year. It's all what inspires me, from the growing season to tasting the fruit to the fruit in the vat. So it's about the clearest segue from the vineyard to the glass, if that makes sense.
So we have the 2018 in our glasses here. What is the field blend for the 18, or is that a closely guarded secret?
Well, it's not a closely guarded secret, but I'm really not trying to focus too much on varieties. Only for, not to be sanctimonious or pompous, but I'm really just trying to recalibrate people's expectations. So when you read a variety on a label, you have a preconceived expectation of what that should taste like based on usually old world or other regions. So by not putting it on the label, I'm just allowing you to just drink it, take it in, and experience the hedonistic expression of the wine without having an expectation. Well, this isn't what cab should taste like. It doesn't matter, because we're recalibrating. There is no benchmark here about what wines from Vancouver Island should taste like. So that's what we're trying to do. But it is mostly Cabernet Franc, Marchal Foch, and Pinot Noir. But it was a really interesting wine, actually. So the fruit came in. I put about 30 liter. Can I get a little bit nerdy, or
you can get as nerdy as you want?
Okay, sorry. If we need a safe word, just say Texas. I'm getting too nerdy.
No, it's totally good. I got to do Germany last week, and I'm the biggest Riesling nerd on the planet, and I got fully nerdy, and people still watched. They still signed up for this one, so we didn't turn anyone off too much.
Okay, good. So the fruit came in, and I put about 30 liters of actively fermenting Pinot Gris into the tank as sort of a natural inoculant, or Pied de Cuve. And then I put 100% whole bunch of the Marchal Foch and Pinot Noir on top. And then I sealed the tank, and I walked away for 2.5 weeks. I didn't look at it. I didn't taste it. I didn't want to freak out. I was committed to the process, right? And then so after 2.5 weeks, I drained it off, pressed the tank, and I was really happy with the vibrancy and the freshness. As you can see, it's a very juicy, vibrant wine, but I wanted a little bit more structure and texture to it. So That year, in 2018, our Somenos Pinot Noir, which is our top cuvee, was extremely tannic. I had to be very careful with my cap management, not to over extract. I literally was doing foot pigeage.
Do you want to walk us through that? Because I know what that is, but why don't you walk that back just for a minute for all the folks at home?
Sure. So pigeage is just a fancy French term for punch down. So I basically get in there with my feet and I push the cap down and macerate. Well, actually with whole bunch, it's a little bit of a different proposal. So if it was destemmed, I would be pushing the cap down. But with whole bunch, I'm basically just providing almost a channel for heat exchange and to allow the juice to kind of rise up through the cap. So I'll push my foot into the cap and then just wait for it until the juice comes up and catches up to the top of the cap. And that cools the ferment as well as allows gas exchange and macerates the fruit. But I had to be very careful not to over extract in 18 because it was so tannic. And then when I pressed it, I put it in the press and only went about 3/4 of the way through the press cycle. And I was tasting the press and it was getting too tannic. So I cut it and I dumped the press. But when I dumped the press, I could squeeze all this beautiful juice of our top Pinot out of the mark. I didn't want to waste this beautiful juice. So I put the Joue back on top and did kind of like a ripasso.
Yeah, I was going to say that sounds a lot like an appassimento method wine.
Yeah. Not an appassimento, but a ripasso.
Yes.
So an appassimento is like dried fruit. This is like I'm putting the juice back on top of fruit that still has a lot of life left in it. And then I pressed that off 3 days later. Not only did it give me more structure and texture to the wine, but it gave me another layer of depth and complexity of the fruit and the perfume.
Well, I'm a huge Fauche head now. How old is the Fauche for this? Because I'm not getting a lot of that kind of typical young Fauche, foxy weirdness. This tastes like a little bit older Fauche, or is that just your particular style that you managed to breed some of that out?
That's an astute point, and I think it's both. It's 15-year-old Fauche, but it's also like I think people really miss the mark. Like I think that's my number one job as a winemaker. I don't ameliorate or change anything, but my job is to taste the fruit and understand the potential of what the wine can be. And I think if you were to come, and please do if you ever want to come during harvest and taste the Fauche fruit at harvest, it is so juicy, it's so vibrant. So I think it's a mismark, and it's kind of, I don't really blame cool climate producers. They're kind of like that younger brother kind of short guy complex where like we can make big wines too. So they're trying to make a Bordeaux blend out of this Fauche that ripens a bit earlier than the vinifera grapes, but they're missing the mark. It's trying to like make a silk purse out of a sow's ear instead of embracing what Fauche does really well, which in my mind, like the Joue to me, and I don't try to emulate, but after the fact, I can allude to what it does remind me of. And it does allude to me, Blaufränkisch or Gamay, that sort of juicy, vibrant, fresh, really consumable wine. So I wanted to embrace its spirit instead of forcing it to punch above its weight.
See, I've been carrying a torch for Maréchal Fauche for a very, very long time, and to have it done in this way, where it's not trying to be this big, super serious, in some cases it's actually the range-topping wine for some wineries. I love this. It's much more playful. It's much more appropriate. I think you really hit the nail on the head with the Blaufränkisch comment, because we sell a lot of Wenninger and Peter Wetzer and that sort of thing here. And Klaus Preisinger, actually, we did a Blaufränkisch, our second ever one of these. I think we're now on number 8, but our second one we actually did a Blaufränkisch. So I think a lot of the folks that you're talking to tonight have had a Blaufränkisch in the last little while, and I think this really nails that.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, it was not intentional. I let the fruit speak for itself. I give it a little nudge here and a little nudge there. I really want the site to speak, so I don't try to. There's no preconceived outcome when I make wine. I allow it to be what it wants to be. But after the fact, I can, well, what it alludes to, and I do definitely think it is Blaufränkisch-ish.
No, I think that's perfectly reasonable. So Marissa asks, what month do you typically harvest?
End of September into October.
As different crops come ripe, or if you're doing field blends, you kind of have to pick a date and just go with that, or do you send pickers out in multiple waves with field blends to pick it right for each grape?
I suppose field blend's a bit of a blanket statement, and I'm probably stretching the context of what a field blend is. I don't harvest everything at the same time. I harvest the fruit when it's ripe, each parcel, and then I do ferment them separately and blend them together after.
Cool.
So probably not like a proper field blend in the Portuguese context where it's just a field of different varieties that they don't really know.
Yeah.
I'm maybe misusing that a little bit, but it's the spirit of field blend is what I'm trying to embrace.
Cool. Grant asks, could I ask you about your approach to label and bottling? Because the label is very, very simple. Maybe not Lock and Worth simple. It actually has the name of the winery on the front. But yeah, it's very simple. It's very unassuming, but I really like it.
I mean, I think to me what I want with the labels, and we've actually changed the whole branding of Averill Creek this year, so it's a completely new branding. But what I really want them to do is I want them to speak to what's in the bottle. So I don't want it to be a flashy, kitschy, come and grab me. And I wanted it to be what I feel the wines are, and what I hope the wines are is elegant simplicity. So not overwrought, not ostentatious, but just like a great example of something simply done, like mid-century modern Danish furniture. Like just clean lines, very elegant, very simple, but not a Abercrombie and Finch T-shirt.
I completely understand. I love that. That's a great analogy. Cass asks, once opened, will this hold for a day or two?
Oh, absolutely. So the thing is, the way that I make wines, working oxidatively. Oh shit. Okay, I won't get too nerdy. I feel like we could go. How much time do we have here?
We have as much time as you'd like.
Okay, so I'll go down the rabbit hole a little bit here. So as a winemaker, you've got two options. You can be oxidative or reductive in your handling of the fruit. So the university taught me, and conventional wisdom says to be reductive. So the fruit comes in, you add sulfur dioxide, which protects it from oxygen. You put it into the press, you ferment it, you protect it from oxygen. Once it's fermenting, it protects itself, because CO2 is an inert gas. Yep. What I do is the fruit comes in, no sulfur. I intentionally oxidize the juice. The juice, when going into its fermentation vessel, is brackish and even black at the end of the press cycle because it's so oxidized. But what I'm doing is I'm oxidizing all the oxidizable polyphenols in the juice. Those compounds then precipitate out during fermentation, so that when the juice becomes wine, those oxidizable compounds are no longer there. So reductive winemaking, they're protective of oxygen the whole way through, but as soon as you crack it, that wine, it's got a day or two to live because all those compounds that can be oxidized are oxidized. Mm-hmm. Mine, they've already oxidized them and they've precipitated out. So you can leave these wines open for 2-3 weeks, no problem.
Wow.
It's my analogy is like reductive winemaking is like parents that Purell everything their kids touch and their kids are always sick. I let my kids swim in the lagoon and eat dirt and they're fine.
You're just nailing it with the analogies tonight. I've got a couple more questions real fast. Tracy, you chilled the Joue red, and I find with some reds that are made in this style that are very bright and fresh and juicy, they can be served lightly chilled. I wouldn't serve it fridge temperature, but I think that it can be just fine with a light chill on it, especially if it's a warm, pretty evening.
1000% agree. Yeah, this wine can be like slightly chilled. Wines that have less tannin are all about juiciness. They do suit a bit of cooler temperatures.
I think so too. There is a distinct problem with the Joue though, which is I really love this Roussanne, and I'm just ignoring it because I like this so much better.
Oh, that's a compliment. Thank you very much. I'll take that one.
Yeah, so I noticed there's the Joue White that we can get here, but the rest of the range isn't in Alberta yet. First, will you tell us a little bit about the Joue White, and are we going to see more Averill Creek wines in Alberta coming up?
Yeah, so the Joue White was pretty fun. The fruit came in, I foot stomped it into half-ton bins and left it on skins overnight. And what that does is it, number one, it releases glutamate, which is umami. So you get a bit of that salinity and that savoriness to counterweight all that fresh fruit. I really wanted to go for, I don't really care, so I'll just tell you, it's Gewürz and Brie, but I didn't want that like blousy, lychee Gewürz thing to come through. I wanted more like white flower potpourri and jasmine tea, and I wanted that to be the aromatics, and then a bit of salinity and a bit of savoriness to counterweight all that fresh fruit, and then that acidity. The job of acidity to me is to leave you salivating, so you want another bite of food or another sip of your wine. And so I think the Joue White is probably our most versatile food wine. And yes, Andrew's going to be bringing in the new Joue Rosé as well, which is very exciting. I'm pretty sure I invented a new way to make rosé, so it's very, very fun.
Okay, you've got to expand on that. Like, there's the traditional method, there's the saignée method, and then there's just, chucking red and white together, which is a valid method. What did you do? What's so different about your rosé? Because now I'm fascinated.
So this is the joy of the new world, is we get to play around and we get to do whatever the heck we want. We don't have any guidelines or rules or stipulations, especially on Vancouver Island. And I'm like a mad scientist in the cellar. Like, you come work for me, my cellar hands get so frustrated because it's all instinct. It's like they can never guess what we're doing because every day it changes. But so the fruit came in for the rosé, and like you said, you can do bled red and white. You can do a saignée, or you can put red fruit in the press it off, and ferment it like a white wine. So what I did with the Joue Rosé is I put the red fruit in the press on the champagne cycle, pressed it off into an open top red fermenter, and then we have this beautiful. I don't destem anything. I do this year. All my reds were 100% whole bunch. But I did, this is the only time I used the destemmer, was to destem the white fruit to go into the rosé, because it provides perfect little berries, whole berries that are uncompromised, not crushed at all. They look like little cranberries. So it was Gewürz and Brie berries on top of the red juice, and I treated it like a red ferment. So I would pigeage or punch down once or twice a day based on taste, whatever I decided for the day. And then at the end of the ferment, I pressed it off, and it's like the color is, I call it my biker rosé or rockstar kick rosé, or Provence is dead, I give it a week rosé, because it's super dark, it's super flavorful and vibrant and refreshing, but it's still bone dry. There's no sugar.
Oh, I can't wait. I think you'll quite like our rosé sign, our rosé section sign that we're having made for us. We've collaborated with a local artist, Eric Dick, who is doing all new signage for all of our country of origin signage. And the rosé sign is just going to be a desert with, cow skulls and cactuses. And, there's absolutely nothing sweet here. We do not put sweet rosé on the shelf. It's not allowed.
That's smart.
And yes, if the technical banter and geekery gets a little bit much for people, I apologize. Do let us know, but I'm thoroughly enjoying it. So, and we're getting good comments so far about it, which is great.
Okay. Sorry, I often get, like, I can't help myself. I go down the rabbit hole a bit, and so I hope I don't lose people. But
no, but you're not losing me. And I haven't had anybody say, hey, yeah, you're losing me. So
shut up, nerd. They're giving me, like, virtual noogie, telling me to whistle.
So yeah, with the Joue Rosé, when are we going to see that? Is that going to be in the next couple of months? Like, we're just entering rosé season now, so it's just about the right time.
Yeah. Well, we'll make a plan with Andrew here coming up, but I think we were all just kind of holding back with this whole COVID weirdness. It's tough to make a plan, but I mean, we want to get them out to you guys as soon as possible. So. Hopefully we can send out a pallet in the next month or so, with some time. Yeah, but if you put the pressure on Andrew, I'm sure he'll order it.
I'm sure I can put the pressure on Andrew. That's not going to be difficult. He's easy to bully. He actually joined us 2 weeks ago for Spain, and we did the Pago Casa Gran Benisal stuff, which was a lot of fun. Andrew was a great co-host for us.
He's so awesome. I really enjoy that man. He's been a great partner out in Alberta, and I feel really bad because haven't really supported them as much as I'd like. But being an Alberta boy, I want to come out and really. I'd love to come down to Lethbridge and see you guys and even just say good day.
Well, hey, when we're actually allowed to do in-store wine tastings again, we'll have you in the store and we'll do that. But let's be fair, doing these is a ton of fun. I've actually got a guy from Argentina next week joining me on Skype to hang out. We've had Andrew, we've had another agent, Eric Mercier, join us. We've had a ton of incredible people. We're going to be, wasn't going to announce this tonight, but I'll talk about it briefly. For those of you who've been asking for a Scotch tasting portion, I just had a phone call with Lee Hansen this morning. We're going to have Andrew Lang on for a Scotch tasting event, so stay tuned for that. We've not quite figured out all the details, but that's in development. We're going to have those lads. It's 2 a.m. in Scotland when we go live, but they're going to stay up and do it with us, which is going to be just madness. But yeah, it's been a lot of fun. I'm loving doing these. They've been just so much fun.
Yeah, this has been great.
Have you been doing a lot of like online tastings for yourself? I know you guys have a wine club and you guys have your online sales. How's things out there?
Pretty good. I mean, it's a bit of like the silver lining with this whole thing is we've been able to really, with the new branding and the new wines and the new style and the new direction of Averill Creek, the online presence is so powerful because everyone's just sitting at home on their computer. So we're getting a lot of great feedback about the new branding, and it's been actually pretty good. Obviously, sales are not great, but they're definitely not terrible. We're doing probably the best as can be expected. So it's been not as bad as it could have been. That's for sure.
I'm going to take a couple of questions here from the crowd. Scotty Fabro, who joined us a little later. The winemaker, our guest tonight, is Brent Rowland, or Rowland? Rowland?
Rowland, yeah.
Rowland, thank you. And yes, he is LCI graduate, so well spotted. Let's see if we got one more question here real fast. Sorry, it's not very interesting when I'm running my way through the thing. Oh yes, that is a thing that I absolutely need to do. Happy birthday, Doug James, who's joining us tonight. I did have that written in my notes, and then I promptly left my notes on my desk, so I'm trying to remember everything that I wrote down for a schedule for this thing off the top of my head, and I did have that written down. I do apologize. Now you're someone. I'm just going to briefly touch back on a couple of the other things we did tonight. What are your thoughts on Roussanne? I covered this quite extensively, but I'd love to hear your take on Roussanne as a grape and just in general.
I love Roussanne. Roussanne Marsanne. I love the viscosity. I love the texture. I'm a very tactile person, so the structure and the texture of the wine, to me, it's not about quantifiable acid or quantifiable tannin. It's about the texture of the acid and the texture of the tannin. I'm always really enamored with the cerebral engagement with a good Roussanne Marsanne. The tactile component and the way that they can build mid-palate density without viscosity is always very intriguing from a production point of view.
Got a question. Can you give us a panorama of what you're seeing from your deck?
Oh, can you guys see me?
Everybody can see you.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Well, surprise. I'm glad you didn't pick your nose or anything. So, yes, you've been on camera the whole time.
Oh, dang. I was chasing my dog. He was running off the...
We saw that, yes.
So this is... yeah, I live on the side of Maple Mountain, which overlooks Maple Bay. So this is the ocean. That's Salt Spring Island right there. That's Maple Bay Marina. And then this is kind of my view off of my deck.
Just a terrible view you've got there.
I know, it's rough. But you got to meet the '1 rock star. Then you got to meet Dave, my dog Dave. He's the best.
I definitely need to meet Dave the dog. Yes, that's not even a question.
There he is.
Say hi, Dave. Yeah, he's a champ, but he's a menace. He always gets in trouble.
Tragically, I've got your video on time delay, so it's just killing me the weight of not being able to see the dog yet. Everybody else has seen the dog. There he is! Oh my god. What an amazing dog. How old is he?
He's 10 months.
Oh. Very, very sweet. So we get the Joue line. Are we going to see any of the others from you guys in the next little while, or is that going to be depending how much of the lower line that we sell, this line that we sell?
Yeah, I mean, I think Andrew's going to play with a bit of the Pinot Noir, the estate Pinot. The problem, and this is so frustrating, man, is that the problem with interprovincial trade is the worst. So, you know, the trying to get something at a higher price point into Alberta is just so frustrating because the amount that the government takes really kills us. We don't make any money on the stuff we sell to Alberta. It's just more about wanting to support Andrew and what he's doing, and I have some friends out there, and so it's a bit frustrating for us. But we're working with it and we're working around it. And I think the Joue wines are pretty exciting, and they're wines that we can work with externally. And the only reason that we first went with those to Alberta was because they were the first wines that I had released under that I had made. But yeah, we'll definitely bring in the estate Pinot. It's going to be a bargain when it comes in. And then
I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, we've got the estate, the Somenos Pinot Gris. The Somenos Pinot Noir is also, we're probably a year or two out before that is going to be released. But yeah, you'll get the estate Pinot Noir, the 3 Joux for sure. And then I think we're looking at maybe a fall release on the Somenos Pinot Gris. But to me, it's the Somenos Pinot Gris is, and again, it's an afterthought. It wasn't a preconceived thing, but it alludes to like Chenin from Loire. It's very tight, very minerally, very.
Do you have that beautiful kind of lamb's woolly, greasy, sexy note that I love so much?
That lanolin for sure.
Yeah.
Bone dry, like Francois Chidane from Mont-Louis-sur-Loire. I don't know if you had much of his stuff, but a little less Vouvray and a little more Mont-Louis-sur-Loire, I would say.
Ooh, that sounds exceptional, actually. I really like that idea.
Well, actually, it inspired me to want to plant Chenin out here.
So what all do you have planted out there? What do you have on the vineyard, and what are you looking forward to planting to work with?
Yeah, so we've got Pinot Noir and Pinot Gris are the patriarch and the matriarch, so to speak. And then we've got Gewurz. We've got a bit of Merlot, which goes into the rosé. I'll never do a dry Merlot from Vancouver Island. Ever. That should never happen. And then we've got I grafted over a bunch of the hybrids this year, but we do still have, I was surprised. I'd never worked with hybrids before, but I do really enjoy the Marchal Foch. So I'm going to keep that. I'll probably graft over the Cabernet Foch to Chardonnay. We have a bit of Pinot Meunier planted, which I'm excited about.
Yeah, I love Pinot Meunier when it's done well. We don't get a lot of straight ones. We get the best 1860s vines Pinot Meunier, and I think that's the only straight Pinot Meunier in the store, unless, unbeknownst to me, one of our champagnes is 100% Pinot Meunier. But what a wonderful, interesting grape, and it's one that I wish I saw more, because it's just got its own style. It's not just a variant of Pinot Noir. It's so interesting. It's so lively when it wants to be.
I completely agree. So to me, the role of Pinot Meunier in non-vintage champagne is it develops a bit earlier than the other varieties, so you get a bit more complexity and depth in your non-vintage at an earlier stage, making it more consumable in its youth. And I find that even in the straight version of Pinot Meunier as a table grape, so it's a great point of difference from Pinot Noir. We can have something that's a little bit more savory, a little bit more developed in its youth. So it would be super fun to work with. And then I want to plant Gamay, and I want to plant Chenin.
You know, we went from selling next to no Chenin to A couple of weeks ago, I think the best-selling wine in the whole store was Mother Rock Liquid Skin, like skin contact Pet-Nat Chenin at $35 a bottle, and we just couldn't keep it on the shelves. You know, people I'd never seen before being like, "Do you have that liquid skin?" It's like, who are you and why are you buying this insane thing? And I love you for buying it.
That's awesome.
But yeah, we've been working so much with South Africa. We had, I think our second or third one of these all time was a South African one, where we had a couple of really interesting wines. But yeah, South Africa for us has got to be just the biggest growth region we have, and the Chenin Blancs that we're selling happily are not the, you know, KWV style, here's a white wine that doesn't taste like anything, please don't notice that it doesn't have a barefoot label. It's not the trash Chenin that we got so used to. It's wonderful to see Chenin just taking off for us. Like, we've always sold Vouvray, and but just to see people buying interesting Chenins has been so incredibly wonderful.
Yeah, to me, it's one of my favorite whites, because I'm so tactile, and I talk a lot about not just acidity but textural acidity. That it's not the amount of acid, it's how does that acid presented in your mouth. Is it angular and sharp and sour, or is it the job of acid should be like the core of the wine that brings the wine across your palate, and then all the fruit and the tannin, everything's wrapped around that acid. And Chenin is the epitome of textural acidity when it's done right. It's just so beautifully presented. It's firm, but not sharp and angular.
And yes, no one will ever forget Clint. We did the Cuvée Clint Pinotage last time, which was a collab between, I believe, Testalonga and Mother Rock, if I'm remembering correctly. And I actually bought, I believe it was Eric, completely out of it. And that was a wine tasting that we ended up selling out of because I could only get 48 bottles of Clint, but I absolutely had to have Clint on the table for the South African tasting. And it was stylistically not that different from the Joue in the sense that it was bright and it was fruity, and it was literally the only Pinotage I've had in the last 5 years I actually liked. So no, that is a wine that people still really, really liked.
Nice.
Do you want to talk just very briefly, because also, just quickly, Grant, did you miss the Apothec Bash? No, you didn't, because Barefoot and Apothec are owned by the same people. So, you know, you didn't miss me ripping on Apothec yet. And the night's still young. Yeah, it's not even 7 yet. I have all the time in the world to get mean to Apothec. I had a question here really briefly. I just lost it. Oh, I had a question about why it's so unprofitable to sell into Alberta. What makes it different from other markets specifically? But, you know, in brief, because as much as people do apparently really like our winemaking jargon, they probably are going to be much less interested in tax codes.
Yeah, I'll be brief. It's just the interprovincial rules. It was when I was at Pearl Morissette, which is in Ontario, it was cheaper for me to get wine to Hong Kong than Quebec. So the amount that the government takes, it's like just a step above prohibition. It's quite frustrating, to be honest.
That's fair. All right. I think we are kind of at the end of the formal portion of the tasting. If you'd be amenable, I'll ask you to stick around another 5 minutes in case we had some questions from the crowd. But I wanted to thank you again right off the hop for joining us. I really appreciate this. This has been very technical and very fun, and I've loved the nerd speak. It's nice to get really geeky about wine with somebody.
Yeah, man, anytime. This is fun.
Rankings for people, yeah. So Tricky denies it feels like three completely different things, but anyone want to rank them? Yes. Rank them while the guy who made it is right here. God, dude, they're so thoughtless.
Hey,
so mean.
Hey, I honestly, the reality of the way that I make wine is, okay, here's another analogy for you, because I'm the analogy king. So a conventional winery is like going to Earl's with 20 people. You can have a burger, you can have Hunan Kung Pao, you can have sushi, you can have ribs, you can have fettuccine. Everyone will be a little bit satisfied. So that's like a conventional winemaker's approach. Well, what can we do to make sure we don't offend everyone, but don't really, don't risk it too much, so you're in this like safe zone. I feel like my wines are that Korean taco truck you have to drive 2 hours across the city to get to. If you don't like Korean tacos, you're not going to like it. But if you do, you'll drive 2 hours to get to them. So if you don't like the wines or you have anything negative to say about the wines, I am not offended at all, because it's almost like I'm not intentionally being esoteric, but I'm intentionally allowing them to speak without ameliorating them to have broad appeal. I want them to give pleasure. I'm a hedonist at the end of the day, but I don't make them for anyone to like other than myself.
And I think that is all that I could ask of you. It gives you wines with soul rather than wines that focus group well.
Yeah.
While we wait for a couple of last questions to come in, we're just going to quickly do a couple of promos. We're going to talk about our next beer tasting coming up May the 13th. That's this Wednesday. We are doing our tour of Edmonton. So we have 2 beers from SYC Brewing. We have the Fjord New England Pale Ale and the Salud, which is a Quick Wheat, which is not fun to say after that much wine. It is a very tropical, fruity, hot ferment. If you were here for the 88 Brewing event, you know exactly what a Quick is. Very, very fun beers. From Situation Brewing, we have the Afternooner Tea Saison. And finally, from Sea Change, we have the Wolf, another New England Pale. So that is coming up this Wednesday. Tasting, as always, is $20. Next week, on the 15th, we are doing so 1 week from today, we are doing our Argentine tasting. And we have the incredible luxury of being joined by another winemaker, this time by Mauro Villarejo from Finca Trapezio. He's going to be joining us via Skype all the way from Argentina, and we'll be talking his way through 2 of his Malbecs and his Cabernet Sauvignon. And then, because we always do 4 wines when we can afford it, we will be doing the Duragudi Malbec as well. So yeah, we are incredibly, incredibly lucky to get winemakers on back-to-back weeks. Tasting is $80, like it pretty much always is. And I want to send a special thank you out to everybody who booked the Mother's Day package with us. We are now sold out of them, but I want to thank every single one of you, because, you know what, we took a gamble going for the wine and flowers thing, but Susie is a personal friend from New Hope YQL, and you really made her week by booking as many as you did. Thank you all very, very much for that. So, enough mushy stuff for that. Let us get back to the questions. Advice on, this is a great question. I'm going to take this one, and then I want you to kind of riff off what I'm going for. Advice on navigating Canadian wines. To be honest, we tend to avoid. How do we find the Joues and avoid the, Mission Hills of the world? For me, look for people who are doing something different. I wanted this Lake Breeze Roussanne before I even knew it existed, because I trusted Lake Breeze, sure, but this was a Canadian winery just going for it with the Roussanne, and I had a good feeling about it. It turned out being great, and we wanted to feature it in the tasting, but I brought this in because I was like, wow, a Canadian winery is taking a shot at a Roussanne? That's ballsy. I gotta support that. That sounds brilliant. If you see someone doing a Cab or a Merlot, or God help them, a Shiraz, or they're doing, a Californian clone of a Chardonnay, odds are pretty good that everything else is going to fall pretty tidily in line with that rather uninspired line of thinking. Go for the weird. My favorite wine labels in the store are actually Locke and Worth, that just have the grape variety on the front label. It's just a blank field with the name of the grape. They don't even bother putting the name of the winery on the front of the label. I love that. I love minimalist wine labels in general, which is why I'm so taken with the Joue. No, look for people doing weird things, because the Canadian wine industry, because it's in its infancy, you look at, the terraces in the Douro Valley, or you look at, Champagne or Chablis. These are wine regions that are so incredibly well established, that have so many of their upfront bills of planting and terracing and everything else paid for, not just years ago, but centuries ago. Everything in Canada is brand new. People have really big, expensive bills to pay off right from the start, and it's so easy to go safe because you need to pay that investment back. It's so much more dangerous to go, okay, well, we've got to pay out all this money up front to get started, and now we're going to take crazy, insane risks and maybe make something brilliant. That's rare. That's surprisingly rare. And that's how I shop for Canadian wines, although that's generally how I shop for wines in general. Look for the guys taking crazy, insane risks and hope they really got it right. Do you want to jump in, Brent?
Yeah, and I think you have to look at. I don't blame Canadian wineries that take that approach. It's a blessing and it's a curse how loyal Canadian consumers are to Canadian wines. I'm just throwing this out there. I don't have facts, but say around 80% of wineries sell out of all the wine out of their tasting room, which sounds great. But what it does is it breeds complacency. So if you can sell all of your Bordeaux blended Merlot out of your tasting room, why take a risk? You hit the nail on the head. It's like $150,000 an acre now in the Okanagan for planted vines. So there's a lot of investment. There's a lot of pressure. If it's not broke, don't fix it. But I think we're at now, Canadian wine, stage one was just to prove that we could produce wine. Period. Like quality vinifera, quality wine. Now we're at stage two, and you're seeing a lot of producers kind of start to be a little bit more ostentatious. Let's figure out what Canada can do, because if we're emulating, well, the best we can hope for is second best. By putting our heart on our sleeve and going for it, we're really going to come out with an identity. And like it or not, I mean, that's my thing. Like it or not, I can't guarantee you're going to like the wines that I make, but I can guarantee you that they have honesty and integrity, and they will represent the site that they're made and the vintage that they were made in. That's all I can guarantee.
I guess BC, to a certain point, has never had its, Paris exhibition, early 1980s California Chardonnay moment. It's never had that incredible breakthrough into the international scene in a certain way. Do you think that's just because the industry is so small and the export market so almost in some ways non-existent? Where do you think that BC's place in the world right now as an industry, and in fact Canada's place in the world right now is, and should it be higher? Should it be lower? Are we right where we ought to be?
Well, I mean, I think it's precisely because no one's really taken a big risk. Sorry, Dave's trying to escape again. And I think we're going to get there. We're now starting to see producers with a little bit more gumption and a little bit more taking a bit more of a risk. Like, for example, I was the winemaker at Pro Morissette. They're in Ontario, so they're not very well known out here. But
no, we carry the Pro Morissette. We carry the Cuvée Métis and one of the whites.
Okay, yeah, I was the winemaker there for 4 years before I was here. And there's no other Canadian winery in a Michelin star restaurant, and we were in over 45. So I think it takes, Mel Pearl, the owner, said something to me and it really resonated. He's like, Canadians, he calls it the Celine Dion syndrome, where you need to be recognized externally before you're really recognized within the country. So our focus was on export and taking the wines to the world instead of just focusing on Canada. And I think that's, if we want to start making a mark for ourselves, number one, we have to define our identity. And then number two, have the audacity and the courage in our conviction to put it out to the world that this is a style of wine that is not emulating anywhere else. It's our own identity. And then we will get recognition. No one's going to recognize us for having a Bordeaux blend that's almost as good as Bordeaux. Like, why would you
God, I hate Meritage, and I hate the word so much. I hate the word so much.
I agree. Almost as much as I hate the word influencer, but...
Oh, God, let's not even get started. Oh, God. But yes, a heritage blend with merit. Oh, God, just gag me. It's awful.
Yeah. Agreed.
And really, what isn't a heritage blend these days? Jesus.
That's the other thing we have to consider. Like, we're also very impatient. Like, we are so young as a wine producing region that, like, really 20 years ago, what was there? Mission Hill, Cider Creek,
Quails Gate, and whatever the heck See You Later Ranch called themselves before they started. Oh, Hawthorne Mountain, I think it was. Yeah. There wasn't bloody much. I was in the Okanagan. We were talking about this earlier, that the first time I went to the Okanagan was in 2002, and my memories of that are completely irrelevant now, because 18 years ago the valley was an utterly different place.
Yeah, but there's some great stuff coming out now. I don't know, have you heard of Scout?
I've heard but not tasted, and I don't think they're listed here yet.
Oh my gosh. So I was extremely proud of the Promore set Rieslings. It was a specific genre that was, you couldn't allude, there was no other region on earth that was making Rieslings like this. And I think Scout is making a similar style of Riesling, but I will say better.
Really?
Yep.
Wow. When I think Canadian Riesling, it's usually, 8th generation, Tauza Estate, or the Wild Goose Stony Slope. I've not yet had the Scout, and I have previously professed my insane love of Riesling.
They will blow your mind.
Really?
It's not what you, it'll change what your perception of what Riesling can be. Its salinity, its savoriness, its texture. It's beautiful. I love the Rieslings.
What's the soil salinity like on Vancouver Island? I mean, being an island, I assume you have a little bit of actual salt to the soil. And I realize that, salinity in the soil does not translate to salinity in the wine necessarily, but what are the soils like where you're working from, or is it incredibly varied?
No, it's pretty consistent. So we're basically on the side of Mount Prevost, and it's a glacial fluvial fan that's deposited glacial stone and sandy loam. So we're dry farmed. We don't have to irrigate. And it's all this, the sandy loam, what that does is has moisture and nutrient retention, but also allows the vines to go searching for water. So the vines can search down 15, 20, 30 feet for water. So we don't have to irrigate anything. So they pull up from the depths of all that like mineral deposited glacial fluvial fan. They pull up all these different nutrients, and it really is quite an expressive soil type. The closest that I can see in my travels is I've done 2 harvests at Escarpment in New Zealand, and it's a very similar soil profile, and the wines are, I would say, allude to that area.
Wild. No, Charisse, I can talk to Patricia at Umami and get you a listing of what is in the charcuterie boxes, because I do think they're doing a really good job. So we're also doing charcuterie boxes. That probably is complete Greek to you, Brent, but we are doing charcuterie trays as part of this as well, as an optional add-on to the tasting. So had a question about those. When we talk about Canadian wine on the international scene, I find that we're very often pigeonholed as doing, Pinot Gris and Pinot Grigio, and we're doing Pinot Noir. What would you say that we're doing really, really well that nobody's talking about yet?
Gamay does really well. I think Riesling does really well. I really want to explore the Chenin route.
I'm trying to think of Canadian Chenins I've had, and I keep coming back to Quail's Gate, which is it's a very pleasant wine, but it's a very simple wine. It's not what I would think of as being that beautiful, waxy, French-style sexiness. It's pleasant, but it almost is more reminiscent to me of a New Zealand Sauv Blanc than it is like a French Chenin.
Well, that's the thing with, I think there's a bit of a misstep when people plant alternative varieties. They tend to be conservative and, again, try to make them look like, don't let them express their full selves because they're scared of the uniqueness of their expression, where I would like to embrace the uniqueness of the expression of Chenin on the island. I have no idea what it will do, but I'm very curious to see what it would do.
I absolutely can type some of the varieties into the chat, Marissa. Just give me a minute to do that. Is there someone else on the island doing Chenin that's inspiring you, or is it just a Cheninless wasteland right now?
It's a Cheninless wasteland, but I just see the components in the whites that we do produce, and everything is like alluding to a good Chenin. Like everything that I love about good Chenin is the components of the whites that are here. That like white flower, potpourri, the telkiness, the savoriness, the texture of the acidity.
I think we're kind of losing you on sound here for a moment.
Sorry. I just had to grab a bottle of wine.
That's totally fair. What are you drinking? What are you having?
Oh, this is actually, this is something you guys should get too. I'm drinking my own wine.
Oh, that's fair.
Yeah.
If I had that option, I would as well.
It's our sparkling wine from the island.
Oh, is this the much famed Pinot Gris sparkling Pet-Nat?
No, there's only 10 cases of that, so you have to speak really, really kindly to Andrew. This is our Charme de Lille, so it's Charmat method sparkling wine that we do, but it's all natural, nothing's added, unfiltered, unfined, no sulfur, and predominantly Pinot Noir, bit of Pinot Gris. Yeah, it's just a fun bubbles.
That I need to try. Devin did actually get in on this, but I'll ask you to just quickly comment on as well. What Canadian winery would have great Grenache? Devin did nail this in the text. It's a very, very hot climate grape. I don't think I've ever really seen it done brilliantly anywhere as that has as short a growing season as Canada. Do you want to jump on that as well?
I have nothing comes to mind, and the reason would be, I believe, the same reason why Syrah is tough, is that it's not very winter hardy.
Oh, I didn't think of that. I thought purely from the actual quality of the grapes, but yeah, I mean, you can't really plant it if it's going to die every winter. That's certainly true. Yes.
I don't think it's very winter hardy, so I don't think you can. They struggle with, like, Niagara could probably do it on a good year, but it would get destroyed in -15, -20.
Is it that little? I mean, I say that little because, you know, I grew up here, but I realize for some people that's incredibly cold. But yeah, no, that doesn't seem. How the heck do they grow that as far north as they do in the Rhone? Like, it has to get down to -15, -20 in the northern Rhone.
I have no idea.
Yeah, I know about. Yeah, we've finally gone too far.
Yeah. And that's just a guess. I haven't done any research on that, but there's no one that I know that's really doing Grenache in Canada.
And it's not a desperately, I mean, if you're going to take a risk with a really hot climate grape like Grenache or Monastrell, say, you'd need to have like a baked-in clientele, something like Syrah or Cabernet Sauvignon, where people aren't going to buy it because they want to support Canadian wine necessarily. They're going to buy it because it's a Cab or because it's a Shiraz. You don't get those baked-in sales with a Grenache or with a Monastrell, so I think that might be why. It's a tricky grape to grow here, and you don't have those guaranteed sales because it's a brand name that people recognize.
Yeah, and I think too, maybe it's one of my first liquid mentors instilled something in me that it should be less about like emulation and more about intelligent responses to the environment you're in. So instead of like trying to make something that you think people will like, make the best version of what would do well in the region that you're grown. So, for example, like, you know, the Okanagan can do big, rich, opulent wines with a lot of power and presence, and we can never do that. So I will never try to do that. I'll never make a big red out here. But
no, that's a very square peg in a round hole.
Exactly.
Doesn't stop half the wineries in Canada from trying, but that is what it is.
And it's a misstep in my mind. I understand why, because they're trying to go what for people think that they want, but what we do better than the Okanagan is we can do perfume and poise and tension and restraint and elegance. So I say my analogy. The Okanagan can do Pamela Anderson. We can do Sophia Loren.
That's an excellent analogy. Yeah. Does chocolate go well with this one? Depends on the chocolate because there's so many different types of chocolate. With the Joue red, I would do a dark chocolate. Don't think I'd go with milk. I think milk chocolate can work really well with like a big chunky oaky Cali Cab or a big chunky oaky Australian Shiraz. Really something, you know, made since 1995 from the New World that doesn't aspire to anything particularly interesting will do great with milk chocolate. Whereas a wine like this, I think, demands a little less residual sweetness in the chocolate and a little more interest, a little more depth. I think we've kept you long enough, Brent. This has been an absolute pleasure having you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, well, thanks for the invite. This is great.
No, this was fun. I am effectively out of Joue Red now, which is that means it's time to wrap up the tasting because there's no more good wine left. That's me. That's not true at all. But you know, I have basically between me and the hand, we have effectively killed the Joue Red. So I think that is as good a time as any to wrap things up. Thank you again for coming and joining us.
Thanks for the invite, and thanks for the introduction to your team. And being a local Lethbridge boy, I think we should keep the connection going.
Oh, I absolutely agree. I'll be sweating Andrew to bring in more of your wines that you'll be sad about because you won't make any money because interprovincial taxes, but I will still sell them anyway. I'll make money, you know, in spirit for both of us.
Yeah, well, we'll work hard together. We'll get it going.
Awesome. Thank you very, very much for joining us. Have a wonderful evening.
You too.
Take care. Bye-bye. All right, so thank you very much to Brent from Averill Creek Vineyards for tasting us through his Joue Red and taking us far down the rabbit hole of wine geekery. I will, as always, stick around for a couple of more minutes, and I will answer more questions via text that come in through the chat. And I will see you all next week for Argentina with winemaker Mauro Villarejo, who I will mispronounce his name horribly to him on multiple occasions next week. So tune in for that. Me horribly offending an Argentine winemaker. I'm Kyle with Andrew Hilton. From me and Brent and the Hand, thank you all so much for joining us. Have a wonderful night and goodbye.